I want to wrap up here. We were discussing earlier in the program the momentum we are seeing at the state level for legislation to protect children from harmful, irreversible gender treatments and surgeries. Now, this is a part of the left's agenda. They want to silence, as Senator Schmidt was just talking about. They cannot defend their positions, and so they're using whatever means possible to silence. But here's something to be encouraged about. Many states are standing up to this agenda. Now, of course, they're being accused of fighting and waging war and attacking and targeting transgender and LGBTQ. They're simply standing up and resisting. They're standing up for common sense. They're standing up for what is right. But they're using a lot of lies in the process that are swaying a lot of people. And I want to talk about that. Joining me now to talk more about how this is unfolding and how we should be responding, Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, who is the director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Prior to her role at FRC, she worked as a clinician and researcher addressing the effects of psychological trauma. As a researcher, she studied the effects of mass traumatic events like 9/11. Dr. Bauwens, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be with you, Tony.
Now, a lot of news today. I don't even have time to get into all of the news just coming out today. The administration releasing new Title IX guidelines. We'll have to leave that to unpack at another time. It's easy just to say they're bad. Nothing coming out of this administration on this topic is good. But a recent study had a disturbing finding about parents who took their adolescent children to gender clinics. Of the parents polled, 51.8% said they felt pressured to transition their children socially or medically. I mean, that's quite significant. What do those statistics reveal?
Yeah, it's a really interesting study that came out of Northwestern. And a lot of his work, it matches, his findings match a previous study that we have on those folks who had detransitioned. And so, but this one had a different element, which included parents. And here we're seeing parents who wouldn't be shut down to gender ideology are saying they're bringing their child to these clinics and they're feeling all kinds of pressure. I think another interesting finding that came out of this study showed that before a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, that a number of these kids had a previous stressful event, a trauma, other anxiety issues, and I think it was about half also had some kind of pre-existing diagnosis when they arrived at the clinic and got the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So again, this also confirms what we would think about just intuitively about this population, but it also confirms some of the research that we're starting to see trickle out from people who have a more fair-minded approach to this topic. Because right now we've seen a lot of politicization of the research.
I want to go to the point of there are those that have experienced previous trauma. Is there any evidence that there was an attempt to address that underlying trauma that may have brought them to this point of this gender dysphoria?
Yeah, and what we saw in Lisa Littman's study on those people who had detransitioned after going through some sort of procedure is that, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was a significant number from a research standpoint. And basically, these people were saying they realize that their underlying conditions and other traumas, other mental health issues were actually responsible for the gender dysphoria that they experienced. So, we know from that study, that report, hopefully we'll see more reports come out. But we know from that data, but we also know from anecdotal reports that people aren't getting a full assessment. What's getting assessed is basically, oh, you said you might feel a little discomfort about your biological sex. Well, you must be transgender. And then here's the pathway that we've laid out for you, which is the medicalized path of mutilation, really.
Well, given that fact, and given that the media is all in on this, Hollywood, entertainment, of course, the Biden administration, I mean, it's quite remarkable that you see such a strong resistance at the state level. I mean, you've got reportedly about 650 bills related to this topic to protect children to one degree or another, whether it's bathroom policies, whether it's sports, or whether it's these experimental drugs and surgeries. 46 states are addressing this in some form or fashion, and over a dozen passing these SAFE Act type bills. So this is a significant issue, but I want to go to the biased nature of the media. There's a report out of, I had a legislator from Kentucky on the program earlier, and an AP story covering the veto override, says, and this is not quoting. Usually the media would go to someone, give a quote that they want, but this is them interjecting their own commentary into the story. They're quoting someone now. They're quoting a kid. If it passes the restricted access to gender-affirming health care, I think trans kids will die. Because of that, the 17-year-old student said, expressing a persistent concern among the bill's critics that the restrictions could lead to an increase in teen suicides. Then it goes on in the next paragraph. Bill supporters assembled to defend the measure, saying it protects trans kids from undertaking gender-affirming treatments they might regret as adults. Then it states, research shows such regret is rare, however. I mean, that's how the media is interjecting their own views, but those views are not accurate. There are many people expressing regrets after going through this process.
Yeah, there are many people expressing regret, and we also we don't have a lot of studies. We don't have good studies on the benefits of, the quote unquote benefits of transgender procedures. But we don't have much because there's been a lot of suppression. So when you're talking about how the media has suppressed this topic, we've also seen the same thing in the academic circles, because there are certain things that are taboo to talk about. So we're just now starting to see people rally around this as they continue to look at the literature that's used to support, like WPATH, which is the World Association for Transgender Health. When we look at those guidelines, they're scaffolded with such poor research. And then on top of it, interesting thing that came out of the White House today, saying that, parents should be in charge of whether or not children are transitioned. Well, when you look at the WPATH guidelines, they actually say, well, it's good to invite parents in on the process. But at the end of the day, if they're not willing, then we need to take whatever measures we need to get this quote unquote life-saving care. Which statistically, research-wise, there is no way to draw that conclusion. It's a logical fallacy. It's just the same rhetoric that comes from the White House, which was, again, released this week, that said the mental health crisis that we're facing is due to LGBTQI discrimination. Well, I mean, I don't know how you can make that statement.
We just got about a minute left, but in Kansas, one of the Democratic state representatives opposing I think the sports bill said that this would cause transgender people to kill themselves. This is the fear-mongering that goes with that. The suicide rate does not dissipate because people go through this process. There's some underlying issue that's not being addressed.
Yeah, and in fact, it increases. We have good data that shows that suicide increases for those who transition, and of course it would, because if you're never treating the real reason for a problem, and you're only adding to it, you're adding to the financial problems that could go with it. You're adding to the social awkwardness. There's so many compounding issues that you're adding to it. So It's actually logical that someone would be more suicidal after these procedures rather than less.
And it's criminal that we have an administration, we have a media, entertainment industry that is driving kids down this path. Dr. Bauwens, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to see you, Jennifer. Thanks so much for being with us.